So again, welcome everybody for protecting the trees. This is, as I've said before, one of my favorite workshops. I hope you enjoy it. And one of the beautiful things about our Valley Water classes is that they are available simultaneously in English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Mandarin. And the way that you reach your room in order to hear the program in the language of your choice is you click on that little world icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and it will launch you into a room that you get to choose which language you would like to hear it in. And you maybe want to also make sure that you mute the original audio. Otherwise, you'll hear kind of a double thing of me talking as well. For everybody, we are going to be translating all the questions into the languages. So go ahead and open that Q&A button that you see at the bottom of your Zoom screen and ask questions, please. We will be translating them into all the languages. So feel free to ask questions, to add on to questions. That's really where the action is while the class is going on. So this evening, I very much want to thank our hosts, Valley Water. This is a wonderful series that we are doing with them, and pretty much one class a month, and it's a perfect time for us to be talking about trees. I do want to remind everybody that within 24 hours of this class completing, you will be getting an email from Zoom, and it's going to go to the email address that you used to register for the class. And that email is going to have resources and links. It will also have a link to a PDF of this book, which is about the watershed approach to landscaping for Valley Water. It's very specific to your area. And there are many other resources that are included in those emails. So keep your eye out for it. If you don't get it, please let us know. And now I'm going to turn it over to Nick Samard to tell us a little bit more about what's going on at Valley Water.
Thanks, Pamela. My name's Nick Samard. Really appreciate everyone being here. I'm a water conservation specialist here with Valley Water, and I work really closely with a number of our different conservation programs. So again, I'm going to share a little bit of information on our programs, what we offer, and give you some reasons on why you should participate if possible. So why is conservation important? Well, I mean, simple to say, it saves you money. It really ensures that we have a reliable water supply. The conservation team here at Valley Water is part of the water supply planning and conservation team. So every drop that we save is a drop that we don't need to import or pump. And so it's part of our water supply, and it's packed into our water supply plan. A lot of people don't also think about the water energy nexus. A significant amount of energy is used in California just to move water. And so if we're not using it, we're not moving it, and we're saving energy and saving greenhouse gases. And again, back to point A, saving money. So just all makes sense. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of a breakdown for water use in the county. You can see that indoor is about half and outdoor is about half. Indoor standards, are constantly evolving, or, we hope they continue to constantly evolve to become more efficient. And so we can get some passive savings through, shower heads, toilet upgrades, washer and dryer upgrades, for example, or at least washing machines. In the term of the outdoors, you can put in the most efficient irrigation system, but you need to match that irrigation system to the landscape that you have, and reducing the landscape's water use, we can really make a big impact on your overall water use. Next slide, please. So again, we offer a lot of different services, from tips and resources to free surveys to rebates. We have it here. So even a lot of education and outreach as well. So we're going to cycle through some of these programs that we have listed here in the next few slides. Next slide, please. Oh, yeah, thank you.
Sorry.
No, totally good. So when I mentioned, we can get some of those passive savings through, indoor efficiency. Valley Water has an online shopping cart where you can order free shower heads, aerators for your sinks, hose nozzles, and a whole lot of other free, again, totally free water saving devices and resources. We have like a practical plumbing guide. That's where you can order a hard copy if you'd like of that sustainable landscape guideline that G3 developed with us. So you just have to go. You're going to get a link, a set of links at the end of this the webinar here, and then you can go ahead and order them as long as your address is within the county. Next slide. I mentioned we have some surveys as well. So if you're a residential site, you can opt for request a free WaterWise outdoor survey. For any residential site, what they're going to come out and do is turn on all the zones in your irrigation system, and on a individual zone basis, they're going to look through to see if there's any leaks. They could potentially measure how much water that you're losing with those leaks, and then assist you also with irrigation scheduling. So they can show you how to schedule your irrigation controller for it to be more efficient. And they have Valley Water's free irrigation scheduling tool that they'll utilize for your address and input that scheduling for you. We also have our large landscape program. So this offers watering budgets and landscape surveys for commercial sites, commercial, institutional, industrial sites, so larger sites. And then we have our flagship program here, our landscape rebate program. You can remove high water use landscapes such as lawn or existing swimming pools with low water use plants. You can see this photo is a great example of what you could potentially have for your landscape. We've got some gorgeous California poppies here. And you can get $2 a square foot up to 1,500 square feet. And then for commercial sites, we have our lawn to mulch rebate. Again, more for a commercial site. So if you're an HOA or a large commercial site, we could potentially work with you on just putting the mulch there and capping off the irrigation. Included in the landscape rebate program, we have some irrigation upgrades. So maybe you don't have a lawn or pool area you want to remove, or that you can remove. And so you want to just increase the irrigation efficiency on your site. We offer rebates for that, from inline drip conversions, upgrading high overhead irrigation to high efficiency models, and then pairing weather-based irrigation controllers with flow sensors and rain sensors as well. And then the last element, final element to the landscape rebate program, kind of like that watershed approach to landscaping, would be rainwater capture elements. So rain barrels, cisterns, which are just much larger rain barrels, and rain gardens, which are, you can see in the photos on the screen here. Photo on the right is a downspout that's diverting into that dry creek bed aesthetic. Not only does it look, it's fashionable and it's functional, is what I like to say with the rain garden. Serves a great purpose, and it also looks great in the landscape. So it's keeping more water on site for your landscape. Yeah, and then again, it's a different rebate program, but really a great pairing with the landscape rebate program to add some supplemental irrigation would be a gray water laundry landscape system. So no permit required. It's essentially just reusing your laundry water, washing machine water that's already been paid for and used, and to irrigate shrubs, trees, flowers, plants like that. So it can be a really great addition to your landscape. And then if you do happen to see water waste, Valley Water is here to educate residents in the county and businesses on water waste. So, I wake up very early in the morning, for example. A lot of times I see, an irrigation head that's looks like the photo you see here, a geyser. The person who owns that property probably doesn't know that at 5 a.m, this is what's happening every day. So you can report water waste. We'll send that person a letter, let them know what's going on, and give them some resources on how they fix it. So again, we have a survey service that we could offer that could help find the leak if it was reported. And then we have the rebate program that could help them, replace that irrigation head with a highly efficient model. And we're going to save questions for the Q&A. And we got a whole bunch of resources in the form of links coming to you after this webinar. But I'd encourage you to reach out to us, the word conservation at valleywater.org, if you'd like any more information on our rebate programs, surveys, or anything else that we have to offer. And with that, I'm going to pass it along back to Pamela.
Thank you so much. Let me just get this here. That's excellent, Nick. I love that picture of the geyser because the home property owners are so calm and they're just looking at each other or looking at the person giving them advice. And I'm thinking, I'd be freaking out if I saw that.
Well, they're ready to resolve it and they're happy that they found it. So
exactly.
Satisfied customer.
I love that part. Exactly. Thank you so much, Nick. Really appreciate it. So questions are being answered at the same time as we're doing the webinar. You can ask Steve Williams from G3. He's a landscape contractor, designer, many, many years of experience as a California biologist. You can ask him questions about pretty much anything having to do with landscaping. It doesn't just have to do with trees. I recommend that you take advantage of this opportunity. And also, Nick is going to be back there answering questions on programs for Valley Water, so you feel free to ask questions about that as well. All right. Well, oh, sorry about that. You're going to be getting a link with all of this information in it, so do not stress about writing it down. All right. Well, let's start by doing a little poll. I'm wondering, have you taken any of the other workshops that we've offered through Valley Water? Let's see if we can run that poll. And you can tell us. And none is an option. It's at the bottom of the poll. This class does not have a lot of polls in it, but I'm glad that you are getting familiar with the technology because there is an evaluation at the end, and we definitely want you to participate in that. So just give it a second here before we roll. I think the next class is pets and kids. Is that possible? I think so. I'm excited about that class too. That'll be in June. But tonight is trees. All right, so let's go ahead and end the poll and share the results. And it looks like some of you have attended other classes, including the garden design workshop. But many of you are new to us, and I really am glad to have you here. So thank you very much. We can go ahead and stop sharing, and I will launch into the program. I mean, the thing that you have come here for, we're about to do. So tonight's webinar is based on these 6 different puzzle pieces. We're going to start about talking just in general about trees and their benefits. We'll talk a little bit about how we have tortured trees, and hopefully won't be doing that in the future. Then we'll get into some of the science about how trees are actually working through their roots with the soil. It's important to understand that so you can really be thinking about keeping them healthy going forward. We'll take some tips to protect trees. We'll discuss how to come up with a proper watering schedule. And then we'll talk a little bit about planting more trees, a couple of design tips and so forth. It'll be a full hour's worth of conversation. So first, we're going to talk about trees and their benefits. Look, here is the most important thing for us to remember, that trees in the wild, you know, they are very ancient creatures. They are not ornaments. Trees are not landscape furniture. They are living organisms, and they are the hosts for many, many other living things. In fact, an oak woodland can support more than 5,000 species of insects and arachnids. It's pretty incredible when we think about how the insect and arachnid population is declining in general, having an oak woodland is really critical for maintaining that community. And many trees are actually what we call keystone species. Keystone species are trees that so many endemic creatures, an endemic is a creature that is found in a particular place and really nowhere else. It's something that has evolved with a particular place. Keystone species will actually support endemic species. And it is possible that if that keystone species, such as a tree, disappeared, an entire species would become extinct. So it's important for us to remember that is the role that trees play in nature, or in our nature. Trying to advance there we go. And trees really benefit the earth in multiple ways. I mean, the first one I think of is shade. That is a pretty important benefit. But there is also this one. Trees are actually the lungs of the earth. Remember that they are taking in carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. They're converting that carbon and using it, and then they are releasing back to us oxygen. Pretty important thing. And in addition to that, they are also putting water vapor into the atmosphere. And that's also very, very important for managing our weather cycles. So trees are incredibly valuable part of our entire ecosystem. And I'm talking not just local ecosystem, but the ecosystem of Earth. They provide food, of course. And they do things like wetlands protection. So a lot of different tree species are able to help us manage flooding and soil erosion from riparian areas. They also provide all kinds of habitat for other creatures besides the insects. There's the birds and reptiles and amphibians. And of course, as we said, insects and arachnids. And I want you just to think about this for a second. An oak tree can support more than 500 different species of moth and butterfly caterpillars. Now, why am I calling that out? Why is it important? Well, birds, when they're rearing their young, need to have these soft-bodied insects. If they don't have the soft bodies, in other words, the caterpillar, the larva of the insects, they can't feed their young. So it's incredibly important for us to be thinking about having trees in our landscapes that can support not just one particular part of the growth cycle of insects or of other creatures, but really the whole growth cycle, the whole life cycle of insects. And oaks are trees that we really need to keep in mind. And there are others which we will talk about. But having moth and butterfly caterpillars is pretty darn important to the entire ecosystem. They support birds of prey and, of course, mammals. Their roots will act as cisterns. It's a beautiful thing about trees is they are re-engineering their soil, just like really all plants. They're re-engineering their soil and they're creating space within that soil to hold on to water. And when you think about the fact that the root system of these trees is extending at least to the drip line or the canopy of the above, they occupy that space in the ground and then of course very, very deep. And so that entire space acts as a cistern. It is, for a mature tree, it can be 50, 60,000 gallons of water that are stored in the root zone of that one tree. And in urban settings, trees are really important for having a healthy city, a place where people would want to live. They help us to conserve energy. For example, a deciduous tree. Now that's a tree that loses its leaves in the wintertime. It can provide shade in the summer when it has all its leaves, but then after it's lost the leaves or part of its leaves in the winter time, it's allowing winter sun to come into our homes. So it really helps us to conserve energy both in the summertime by keeping us cool and in the wintertime by helping to allow the sun to heat up the building. They help us reduce stormwater runoff. And again, if you think about the roots as giant cisterns, you can understand that the canopy is actually slowing water down. It's spreading out that water at least to the edges of the canopy. And then when it falls on the ground, it's allowing that water to sink into the ground and be stored in that root zone. So really the entire tree operates as a massive stormwater runoff prevention device, if you will, living device. And there are incredible psychological benefits to having trees in our environment, especially to help us reduce stress. One thing that I am often reminded of is humans have evolved to be able to identify more shades of green than any other color. And that is part of the whole brain development of humans. It helps us to think creatively. It helps us to think at all, really, but it also helps to de-stress us. And it's one of the reasons why in a place that is tree covered, where we can look up into canopy, we begin to feel just completely different. And it's because we have evolved to have that relationship with trees. But unfortunately, there is a lot of horticulture going on. Trees without cities become deserts. It's just as simple as that. If they don't have trees holding on to water, slowing water down, shading, uh, they very, very rapidly become deserts. And actually, cities without trees also become social deserts. And what that means is that people don't want to be walking around in a city if there's no tree cover or if there's no shade. Um, it has been shown that the more trees are in an environment, the lower the activity, the legal activity that goes on, the calmer people remain even when it gets hot outside, the more social interaction there is. Um, uh, Businesses, that have trees near them are actually places that people want to go because they're welcoming. And I think it's quite ironic that you often find trees in front of businesses are just tortured down because we want to make sure that you can see a sign. And in fact, that is not making it conducive to going into that particular business or, even recognizing that the business is there. So yeah, cities without trees become social deserts. And we can't reap the multiple benefits of trees if they aren't healthy. So we need to keep them healthy. Many trees in our urban settings are pruned annually to avoid leaf drop. That's not a good reason to prune a tree. In fact, there are very few reasons to prune a tree, and certainly I can't think of any to prune it like this. And as a result, they are dying. They're susceptible to drought and disease, in large part because of the poor practices that we have in taking care of them. We allow trees to be growing in bare soil. There are no trees that would want to be in bare soil. We plant them and then we cover up the ground with gravel. This is a really difficult to defend practice. We really want to limit gravel to places like pathways and seating areas, not where anything is actually going to be trying to grow. When we have gravel down on the ground, it makes things a lot hotter. There's no decomposition happening to help create food for microbial activity. And the maintenance on something like this is actually quite difficult because the leaf litter falls down. The tree is trying to put mulch on it on the ground, and that leaf litter falls down on top of this gravel, and it's very difficult to separate it out. You really actually increase your maintenance quite a lot by having gravel as a ground cover. And the same thing goes for planting trees in decomposed granite. When we do something like this, we are starving the tree of its ability to create more or better soil or have more microbial interaction. Trees in decomposed granite are really suffering. Plus, it's hot. And then we often find that around trees, there is a mulched area, but instead of it being leaf litter or some other fine material, it's these giant pieces of bark, which nothing can decompose. And so this is not good for the tree either. Oops. If we allow ivy and other types of vining plants to grow up into a tree, this will actually smother that tree. It's covering the ground, but it's also actually impacting the tree itself. So we don't want to have ivy on the tree. And when we put down rocks like this in an effort to try to save water, or maybe sometimes it's an aesthetic choice. I can't tell you how many hotels I've walked into and they seem to want to be kind of fancy and they put rock down around the trees. And all I can think of is that poor tree isn't able to breathe with all those rocks on top of the ground around its roots. Please get rid of the rocks. So this rock material is compacting the soil around the tree. And as I said, it's keeping this tree from really being able to breathe. It's a very poor choice around the tree. It'd be better to not have anything. But then again, we could have a situation where the trees don't have anything around them and they are overly watered. We end up with very depleted soils. I mean, if you look at this picture, yes, there could be mulch here. It definitely shouldn't be watered so much that the roots are covered in moss, and all of that would be so much better. It would be great if this tree weren't in a tiny place either, frankly. It's too big a tree for such a tiny place. The roots want the water, not the trunks. So we need to make sure that we are irrigating properly and getting that water to the roots of the plants and not allowing it to hit the tree. And oh, by the way, look at the hardscape in this picture. I mean, the tree and the hardscape are the most valuable things in this picture, and they are both being damaged by irrigation. If you do drip irrigation, it needs to be at the base of the tree. And when trees are planted, they may need to be staked in their youth, but they're not to be kept on their nursery stake, as we see on the left-hand side. Actually, the tree needs to move around a little bit. It needs to have the junction of where the trunk meets the roots. That needs to have a little bit of mobility in it so that it can become strengthened. When you allow the tree to stay on the nursery stake, it's not moving enough. And so it does not develop that strength. And it can be very, very weak as it grows older. In the case on the right-hand side, we have stakes that were maybe installed early in the tree's life, but the the tapes are digging into it, and yeah, it's not properly staked. So we want to be conscious of this. I'm going to show you proper staking at the end when we talk more about planting trees. But if you have trees on nursery stakes or staked like this, something needs to be done. We also want to be careful about allowing water to pond at the trunk. The trunk is a very susceptible area for insects. It rots easily when there's moisture against it or kept against it. Whoever planted this tree was trying to do the right thing by creating a basin around the tree so that there would be water there, and that sufficient water could be supplied to the tree. and it wouldn't dry out very quickly. But the problem is it planted the tree in the bottom of the basin. And so as a result, any water that fills up in this basin is going to be held against the tree. And you can already see there that at the crown, at the place where the trunk is meeting the roots, this is where it's already looking damaged. It's looking like that's going to end up being a problem. So we may want to make a basin around the tree when we plant it, but we don't want to plant the tree in the bottom. And we certainly don't want to have to be butchering our trees in order to keep them in the landscape. If you think about it, this is just the wrong plant in the wrong place. This is a 70, 80, 100-foot tall, 100-foot wide tree, and we're trying to have it as a little box. So yeah, trees need our help. Good thing is we know what to do. We're going to learn now about how trees, roots, and soil all work together so that we can help them. Trees are a very important part of the watershed approach to landscaping, which, as many of you may be aware, is the functional principle for all of our design work. Really, all of our thinking about landscapes comes from this watershed approach. And in this approach, we are evaluating every property as though it's a mini watershed. We're making sure that we are holding water on the property. But really what we're doing is we're looking at our property for where water first falls on it, like a roof, and where it leaves the property and goes into the street, which is basically like a creek during a rainstorm. And everything in between those 2 points is our mini watershed. We can have a positive effect on that mini watershed. And we use 4 principles. We concentrate on building healthy living soil on our mini watershed. This acts like a sponge, so it holds water in dry times and releases it in wet times. We select climate appropriate plants. And really, that is what tree selection is all about. It's not just any tree, it's trees that are most appropriate for our climate. This is perhaps an emphasis on local native trees. And there are other Mediterranean trees that will be appropriate in our climate, but we really don't want to be just importing whatever from wherever. It's a focus on having trees that can enjoy our wet winters and also survive in the dry summers. And then the third principle of the watershed approach is we passively capture rainwater as a resource, meaning there are no such things as flat yards anymore. We are making contours in the landscape to hold onto water. Oh, by the way, planting trees is one way that we can capture more water, so stay tuned on that. And then the fourth principle is that we have highly efficient supplemental irrigation only when necessary. And this means that we are thinking about the irrigation system if we need it, and making sure that it is designed, the system is designed, installed, and maintained properly. And also that we have a handle on our irrigation controller. So we're not just irrigating because it's Tuesday. We're really learning about how much water is in the soil, and we're irrigating when the plant actually needs it. Those are the 4 principles of the watershed approach. They all come into play with planting trees, and that is going to be sort of underlying the decisions that we make. I also want to remind you that trees are in control of their environment. Like all plants, trees are actually cultivating a microbial community in the soil. We call it the soil party. And that microbial community is performing functions for the tree. Not only are those microbes mining nutrients for the tree when the tree needs it, but also they are delivering water, they're delivering oxygen, they're delivering messages from other trees and other plants that are in the landscape. When the tree is during the daytime, the tree is actually extracting carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. It uses the sun to do this. So it's all solar powered. And its leaves are essentially solar panels. It enables that plant to take the CO2 out of the atmosphere. The oxygen is returned to the atmosphere, but that carbon is then taken, it's used to build the body of the tree. And then a big portion of that carbon is actually converted into all kinds of carbohydrates and pushed down through the roots of the plant, so roots of the tree, so that the tree can re-engineer the soil to turn it into a giant cistern to hold water, to manage a huge microbial community, to feed it. It's a pretty amazing thing. And another thing that I just want to point out, and this is really all plants, but trees are really good at it, is when they release water into the atmosphere. So remember, trees need to take water out of the soil in order to cool off their solar panels, right? If they are doing all this work of photosynthesis in the sunshine, their leaves or solar panels become quite warm. And so they utilize the water in the soil in order to cool themselves down, and they put that water back into the atmosphere. And this is super important because that water that's going back into the atmosphere is the future source of rain. Trees actually attach little microbes onto those droplets of water so that the water will condense again over the land. I mean, trees make their own rain. So it's pretty cool. They are definitely in control of their environment. And in the soil, there's this giant soil party going on. It's very important for us to remember that plants don't feed themselves. The roots aren't doing the nutrient gathering. They are managing microbes that do the nutrient gathering and bring it to the plants. And all of the good biology, the billions and billions of microbes in the soil around the tree, actually will colonize the entire tree. So they go up the trunk and onto the branches and leaves. Every single part of the tree is covered in good biology. And that good biology creates a defense shield. So if some kind of pathogen, airborne pathogen, comes into the tree canopy, those microbes are able to deal with it. It also is sequestering water, again, at the roots of the tree itself. So this is a very, very important aspect, is that the tree is working. Really, the tree and the soil are almost like one organism. They are working together. They are a part of each other. And this is how plants stay healthy. And then don't forget, when a solar panel, let's say a leaf, is finished doing its job, the tree will drop that leaf onto the ground right at its roots so that it can decompose and return all the good biology and the organic matter back to this microbial community at its roots. It will drop its fruit, it'll drop its flowers, and all of that organic matter is essential to that plant continuing to have a really good immune system and be able to continue to sequester water and everything else that it does well. So we definitely want to make sure that we're not just blowing away all that good organic matter, because that is the source of the biology for the tree. And trees and fungi in particular have a very important relationship. You know, fungi cannot perform photosynthesis, so it can't get carbon in any way except to pair up with a tree that has the leaves that can get the carbon out of the atmosphere. And so trees exchange with fungi a lot of different things. Fungi are actually better than tree roots are at accessing very tiny amounts of water. They're better at accessing particular nutrients in the soil. And so the trees and the fungi actually pair up and what you see in this picture is a fungi colonizing the roots of the trees and extending that root zone out into the soil, down and out. And it makes it just a bigger cistern than ever, and it also gives the tree access to nutrients in far greater places. The fungi also connects the trees to each other. It's important to remember that trees are not solitary individuals. They like to live in community, and the fungal network is actually what connects them in the ground. So it's pretty important for us to remember some of those things as we are dealing with trees. And there are actually mother trees in forests that are directing the activity, their own activity and the movement of carbon throughout the entire forest. They are directing it through the fungal network. Mother trees can actually identify their own seedlings and send carbon to those seedlings. Because if you think about it, the little seedlings are growing in the shade of other trees. They can't access sun to do photosynthesis. They can't access the carbon by just taking it out of the atmosphere. So mother trees will actually use the fungal network to send carbon to their own seedlings and help them until they get tall enough to be able to access the sun. Another just beautiful thing to understand about trees and their relationships with each other is in a forest where you have trees that are evergreen and trees that are deciduous. When the deciduous trees lose their leaves, they can't perform photosynthesis. So the evergreen trees send those trees carbon through the fungal network and help them to survive the time that they don't have leaves on. And then in the springtime, when those deciduous trees put their leaves back on, they will repay the evergreen trees with carbon. So yeah, it's pretty beautiful. And even when a tree is dying, it still has a role. Let's not clear out dead and dying trees so quickly. Let's allow those trees to direct their carbon into the fungal network and transmit it to other trees that are nearby. So let's talk, now that we kind of understand more about how trees operate, let's talk about some tips for protecting them. So first of all, we definitely want to leaf the leaves in place. We want to make sure that the organic matter from the tree itself is kept with the tree as much as possible, and that there is a 3 to 4 inch thick layer, excuse me, of either the natural tree mulch from the tree or another small kind of wood-based mulch that is near the tree. Sometimes we have to supplement the leaves themselves, but we definitely want to keep that thick mulch on there. And we want to stay away from the trunk as much as possible. I know in this picture, the leaves are all the way up against the trunk of the tree. It's a very mature tree, and there doesn't seem to be any damage there from these few leaves that are kind of piled up against the tree trunk. But in general, we want to make sure that the mulch, especially if we apply it, is away from the trunk. And we want to respect what's called the drip line. The drip line is the edge of the canopy of the tree. It is everything underneath the canopy of the tree is really kind of sacred ground for us. We don't want to be digging in that area. We don't want to be planting really in that area. We don't want to disturb the roots. And we want to just realize that the drip line, that's not the extent of the roots of a tree, but they are at least out to the drip line. So this is very important for us to sort of remember that these are not just enormous creatures above ground, but also they are large below ground. And if we're going to plant around a tree, we are outside of the drip line when we plant. Sure, a ground cover or something can go into the shade of a tree. That's fine. It's working itself out, but we don't want to dig the hole under the tree to plant the plant. And we don't really want to plant trees in basins, in rainwater basins, unless they are riparian trees. Now here we have sycamore trees that are riparian trees. So they are in low spots, but they're not in the lowest spot of this basin. They are along the edge of the basins. So it's important to remember that, don't forget the tree is able to access underground everything within its drip line. It doesn't need to be planted at the bottom of a basin where it might get too wet. And when we are planting a tree, or actually, this is even more important when we have an existing tree and we're doing work on a project, we don't want to mess with the grade around the tree. We want to make sure that we're not piling up any kind of soil around the tree, or especially around the trunk. We don't want to be covering over the roots of the tree if they are already exposed. And we don't want to be excavating underneath the tree and removing soil from around the roots of the tree. We want to really go to the drip line and no disturbance to the grade underneath the drip line, and especially not adding any additional soil there. We want to practice integrated pest management with our trees. And integrated pest management is really just sort of a way of saying do no harm. You don't jump to the bazooka spraying, of some kind of toxin to manage a pest in integrated pest management. You first observe, and then you take measures that are small interventions. And, over a period of time, as you observe, you may increase the kind of intervention that you're making, but you're always trying to do the least amount of intervention in integrated pest management. With trees, that's particularly important because they can sometimes exhibit symptoms, and you may be misinterpreting what's going on with those symptoms. Healthy trees are, of course, more resistant to pests and disease. And so we want to start by making sure we have healthy trees. That's keeping the mulch, irrigating properly, not digging underneath the canopy of the tree. Something to remember is that in all landscapes, diversity of plant material and of plant families is what really prevents pests and diseases from decimating any one particular plant. So with regard to trees, we want to be thinking about that. I know that for, the last 100 years, we've been planting the same species on a street as street trees. But, it probably wasn't a very good idea. It probably should have been a bunch of different kinds of trees so that there would be diversity in neighborhoods. And the picture you see here is of forest management, and you can see that when it's all one kind of species of tree, the species can be decimated by a disease because there's no diversity, and there's no resilience that results from that diversity. If you have a tree that is exhibiting some kind of problem, observe first. Examine the whole tree for symptoms, especially in times of drought or of flooding. Either way, you want to be really looking at your trees and sort of staying on top of how they look, monitoring during those stressful periods. Never apply fertilizers to a tree, especially if it looks like it's having an issue. The only thing that you would ever want to apply around a tree would be some kind of organic matter in the form of compost or mulch. You definitely don't want to be applying fertilizers, especially if it looks like it's in decline. It does not help it. We actually want to build the soil party. We don't want to come up with some kind of vitamin boost for that tree. That doesn't work. If you are going to have your trees pruned, hire a licensed professional. This goes for your large shrubs as well. These are your investment in your landscape. All your big money is going to be spent on hardscape and on trees and large shrubs. So why would you have someone who is not a licensed professional prune it? In this case, the tree is pruned improperly. And the reason it looks like a fuzzy tree is because every single place where leaves could possibly grow on this tree, all over the branches and the trunk, has sprouted growth because the tree is so desperate to put back on leaf material. It's really, this makes me very sad, actually. You want to avoid these pruning practices, absolutely. If you hire somebody and they do something like this, if they're licensed, you want to actually go after their license. But if this is really, this is reprehensible, honestly. So topping, there really aren't any conditions that make topping a good idea. You're basically cutting off the head of the plant. That can't be good. And lion's tailing is a practice where a little bit of green is kept kind of on the end of each of the branches. The problem with that is that green material becomes a sail. So when the breeze blows, the sail gets picked up, and this makes the limbs very, very weak. Often you will see trees losing limbs when they have been lion's tailed. You never want to cut more than 25% of the canopy within a growing season. There's really no reason for it. If we're in drought, no pruning, especially no aesthetic pruning. And the reason is that every time you cut the tree, it needs water in order to recover. So if you're pruning a tree, it needs to access a water reserve in order to not get too stressed and have damage. The only reason you would ever want to prune anyway is if you have dead, damaged, or diseased plant material. Uh, it's possible you might have something what we call deranged, which means that a limb or a branch, part of a branch is going in the wrong direction, making it weak. Okay, that might be a reason to prune, but really we want to minimize pruning, and especially in times of drought. We definitely do not want to be pruning trees if there's any indication that there are birds nesting in those trees. You know, really March through August is no time. And if you have questions about this, Steve Williams is an excellent person to be talking to about this. We don't want to be pruning trees. It's actually illegal in California to destroy nests or eggs of really any bird. And so if there's an active nest, pruning is not something that you want to be doing. You want to protect the roots of the tree during construction. And this is from compaction, so you want to make sure nothing is driving over, no equipment is driving over the roots of the trees. You want to make sure that there's no equipment or anything that might, you know, actually run into a tree or into branches and damage, you know, the trunk of the tree. You want to make sure that there are no heat or chemicals being dumped in the area around the tree. I can't tell you how many times I've been on properties where there's a beautiful mulch layer under a tree and the painter comes out and pours the paint water into the mulch. Now, I know that they are thinking that they're doing the right thing because they think, oh, you know, this is going to, first of all, it's going to disappear. And secondly, you know, this tree maybe needs water and, you know, maybe they think that microbial activity is going to take care of it. But this is just, this is just poisoning the tree. Please do not do that. And make sure that you're talking to your contractors to make sure that they are not doing it. Same thing with if you have stucco work done, right? The stucco water often is poured under trees. Really just a terrible idea. And you might not see it right away, but you will see it. And it will be, within a couple of years, you will see the decline. The same thing is true for cutting the roots of trees. If you cut the roots, you will see the decline of this tree. Okay, let's talk about proper watering. What happens when we have trees that are in lawn areas, and then we decide, okay, we're going to turn off the sprinklers? What happens to those trees? Most of the time, they suffer. And the reason is that when a tree is planted in lawn, like you see here, the irrigation that has been happening to keep the lawn green and happy is too shallow and too frequent. And so these trees have essentially been trained that they don't need to have strong roots. They don't need to, um, look for water. They may not even need to make associations with fungi in order to get access to water. They're getting watered a couple times a week, right at the surface of, their where their roots can access it very, very easily. So you have trained these trees to be weak and to not be able to tolerate dry times. So we need to be thinking about if we remove grass, okay, now how are we going to keep these trees alive, first of all, and secondly, retrain them so that they can actually survive dry times and they can survive the new plant material that you're going to be putting in here, which probably doesn't require, hopefully, does not require the same amount of water and certainly is not going to be irrigated uniformly, shallow irrigation. We have to be very, very careful that we're not just cutting off water to everything and expecting that trees have deep roots, they should be fine. No, they're not fine because you've trained them to not be able to access that water deeply. The trees actually need proper irrigation. And what you're seeing here is the way a tree should appear in a landscape that has lawn, even without that lawn then being removed. The tree really shouldn't be sitting in lawn. First of all, if you have lawn coming up to a tree trunk or even within just a few inches of the tree trunk, how do you mow it? I mean, think about this for a second. How do you mow it without damaging the tree itself? You may get out there with a string trimmer and trim around the tree, but that string trimmer will damage the tree trunk. And if you have a tree like that, it will suffer. It will probably die in not, too distant future. If you have a tree planted in lawn, you want to make sure that you have removed that lawn out to the edge of the drip line of the tree so that there really isn't any lawn growing underneath the canopy of the tree. And then that area gets filled with mulch. And it needs proper irrigation, and that irrigation needs to be separate from the irrigation that's watering the lawn. So if you have a tree, whether it's existing or a new one that you're planting and it's in an area that has lawn, you would want to make sure that, first of all, the grass is removed all the way out to the drip line of the canopy. And then you would want to install a separate irrigation valve and put a new drip irrigation zone under the tree. Now, why would you want to have a separate irrigation zone, first of all? Well, the reason is that this gives you control. If for some reason your lawn, you have to turn off the water to your lawn. Let's suppose we're going through a really intense drought and it gets to the point where we really can't be irrigating lawn anymore. And you're going to turn off the irrigation to your lawn. And why not? Because actually lawn is very, very cheap to replace in comparison with a healthy tree. So we're going to turn off irrigation to lawn. We want to make sure that we have irrigation to the trees because that is our investment. So the only way we can do that is by having a separate irrigation valve for the tree. And we're going to be doing a drip irrigation zone so that we're putting that water as efficiently as possible right at the roots of this tree. And when we install that drip line, we're going to want to make these concentric circles around the trunk, and the concentric circles are going all the way out to the drip line and then again beyond the drip line. And, we're often asked, how far apart should these circles be? And you see here, there are a bunch of different widths that are indicated. You want to be at least 12 inches away from the trunk of the tree with the first circle. So 12 inches for a smaller caliper tree, 24 for a larger caliper tree. After that, you're going to have concentric circles that go at about the same distance all the way out to the drip line and then beyond for at least one circle. The objective here is for you to be able to irrigate the area under the canopy and have a 50% water coverage. So when you turn this irrigation system on, at least 50% of that soil is getting wet when you have an irrigation event. And so, yes, it's going to be different distances depending how big the tree is and how wide the canopy is. But the objective is to have 50% of the soil surface wet. But regardless of what you have planted at the base of a tree, make sure that your trees and your large shrubs are on a separate and dedicated irrigation valve. There are other ways to water your tree, and these are more solutions where you're filling up, let's say, this tree diaper. You fill it up with water, and then that water is going to emit slowly for the tree. So this isn't actually hooked up to an irrigation system. You often see trees planted in medians or in parkway areas using this technique. They aren't going to have long-term irrigation on them, but they're using the diapers to, it's so funny to just say diapers in the middle of a tree class, I'm sorry. But they're going to be using this device to be able to fill it up once a week, let's say, and allow that water to come out. So in this particular case, you would be watering, let's say, every 2 to 3 weeks. And there's also things called tree gators. There are different sizes for different calipers. Caliper is the size of the trunk. When you hear that word, you see that word here on the slide, that's the size of the trunk. So a caliper of 4 to 5 inches in diameter or around means that you could use one of these smaller tree gators, which you fill with a hose, and then it will empty slowly over a period of hours. There are also tree gators that are for larger caliper trees. So this is a 5 to 8 inch caliper. And the same thing, it's filled up with a hose and then it emits slowly into the soil around the tree. But really, the question of how much you water your tree is the same question that you're asking yourself for the entire landscape. And the good news is that Valley Water has a great program that you can tap into to figure out how much water you're going to be applying in your landscape. It depends on soil type, the depth of the roots, the time of year, whether or not it's deciduous or evergreen. And then the garden context. Is it separate from the grass or is it still in grass? And then, of course, what is the the type of tree and the type of watering. Are you using a drip irrigation system, or are you trying to water it in some other way? So all of those things, those are things that come into play for irrigation for your whole landscape, and they are, of course, essential in your tree irrigation. There is a plant watering calculator that the Center for Landscape and Urban Horticulture at UC Davis has published, and it's a great way to kind of get familiar with the considerations for watering your tree. You can go there and select that you want to irrigate a large tree or shrub, and then it will ask you what the canopy of the tree is. Now, the reason it's asking you what the diameter of the canopy is, because they are using that as a proxy for how wide the root zone is of the tree. So they're essentially saying, okay, if you have a 40-foot diameter canopy, your root zone is going to be about a 40-foot diameter root zone. So that is really why they're asking about the canopy. And then they will also be asking you about this thing where it says your CIMIS station. And this is essentially a station that is telling you how much water plants need in a particular area. You can look up your CIMIS station by going this particular irrigation calculator has a way of putting the name of your city, so let's say San Jose, into here, and it would then take you to a nearby CIMIS station. And so that station, which is California Irrigation Management Information System, that station is going to tell you how many inches of water are required per day, per week, per month, per year for a reference plant material, which is basically grass. And this watering schedule actually converts it into inches per week. It converts it into the appropriate amount for a tree. And it sounds very complicated. I mean, honestly, irrigation can be. Again, the Valley Water calculator is probably, better for you, but you can kind of play with this and also, learn a lot about irrigation here. In general, something to just have in your mind is that trees and shrubs are going to perform a lot better if they're not irrigated very frequently. So I mean, most plants in the landscape don't want to be irrigated as frequently as we often do. So it's better to kind of underwater trees than it is to overwater them. 5 days is absolute minimum between watering, but it's really going to be more probably like 14 or 15 weeks for, 14 or 15 days or 2 weeks period of time for anything that isn't a dry native tree. When you get into dry native trees, a nice irrigation once a month because they're in a garden setting, or maybe even once or twice a growing season is going to be plenty, especially if they're established. When they're new, they're going to need more water. But in general, we are going to try not to over irrigate them. Well, let's talk a little bit about planting some more trees, because this is a pretty important part of what we're doing. We need to plant a lot more trees. We need to plant a lot more plants, not just trees, but trees really are needed. And I find in design that people are afraid to plant trees. They've heard horror stories about trees lifting sidewalks or walkways, or harming their foundations, or getting into their sewer pipes, or dropping lots of leaves or fruit or blossoms. And so they're solution to that is not to plant trees at all. And really, I think we need to do more research because any one of those things can be addressed. Any one of those problems that I just mentioned can be addressed. And oh, by the way, it's not just trees that are going to have issues like that. But the more we educate ourselves about particular trees for our, particular community, um, I think the more likely we are to select a good tree for our site. And there are many, many good trees. They don't all have to be giant, and they also don't all have to be tiny. So let's talk about why we would use a tree in our landscape design. I have 3 suggestions that I use all the time for tree placement, and I want to share them with you. The first is that you can use a tree to essentially anchor your landscape. The tree becomes something that maybe when you plant it, it's not casting shade, but your eye is toward the 3, 5, 10-year mark when the tree would be casting shade in a particular place and creating an inviting anchor for the landscape. In this particular drawing that you see here, the tree is placed so that the canopy is actually covering the front entry and of the house and also part of the walkway coming up to the house. This is a very, very inviting placement. People love to walk under the shade of a tree as they come into the home. It's a very genteel, kind of landscape design. And if you're only going to do one tree, it's a good place to think about placing it. Another option is to frame a view. So, it's funny because this landscape plan doesn't have a window on it. It has the front door, but it doesn't have a window. I like to think there's a window there at the front of the house. And if I'm inside looking out of that window, I'm thinking about using trees to frame my view from inside to the outside. So this is not framing the view of the house. This is the pleasure of sitting inside the house and looking out through the landscape and into the environment and having those trees frame the view that I'm experiencing. So if I keep that one tree creating shade at the front entry, I would add another tree across the landscape to, again, frame that view out of the front window. It's a very nice way to create some shade in the front yard. And again, these do not have to be very, very large trees. You can go the whole way and really enclose a space and create a whole sense of a shaded landscape. I think it's interesting when I talk to people about landscape design, sometimes they don't even imagine that they could have a shaded landscape, that there's something kind of wrong with that, that every landscape has to be out in the bright sun. There are many, many, many California natives that thrive in a little bit of shade, and many Mediterranean plants that thrive in those conditions. You can create that by adding not just framing your view, but now maybe adding another tree, which would enclose that whole front yard for you in either inside the house looking out, or even just enjoying that front yard. This kind of an arrangement is creating a canopy over at least half of the yard, and it encloses the space from the street, from the neighbors. It makes it a lot more private without creating a hedge. So these are things to consider. When you plant a tree, it's a lot more than just plopping the tree in the dirt. You need to make sure that the tree is really, really hydrated. This is true for all planting, but especially if you're going to be doing trees, we recommend that you have 5 times that you water the hole or water the tree. You dig a hole and you put water in it and let it drain out. That's your first one. You may, if the tree is small, either a 1 gallon or a 5 gallon, you may be able to put it into a bucket and get it wet. If not, you're going to put a hose on it with a slow drip and make sure that whole container is very, very, very wet. You're going to water your hole again before you put the plant into it. You put the tree into the hole, you water again, and then you backfill and you water again. And you're going to say, why am I using all this water? I thought it was about saving water. But you're using water now to make sure that this tree does not go through shock. Most times that plants go through shock, it has nothing to do with nutrient or anything like that. It has everything to do with the hydration of the soil. If the soil is dry, it will suck the water out of the roots of the plant, in this case, the tree. It will suck the water out of the root ball. So everything has to be wet when you plant. And then from there, you're managing your irrigation so that it's not overly wet after you've planted. But when you plant, all the soil around it needs to be wet, and the hole needs to be wet, and the root zone needs to be wet for the tree. It's very, very easy to become enamored of the architectural details of a tree, like this beautiful Arbutus marina. It's got a gorgeous form in that multi-trunk form. The structure is beautiful, a wonderful canopy. The flowers are very pretty. They attract insects and birds. The fruit is wonderful and edible. It's really easy to describe the tree that way and just get really kind of wrapped up in this gorgeous bark and all of these elements that are more like these kind of general aesthetic elements. But step back. Make sure that you are planting the tree that has the right scale and you're thinking about that tree at maturity. These are two trees planted next to each other. One is a sycamore tree and one is the Arbutus marina. They are both big trees. If you think about it, the building next to that is probably 15 feet at the top of the roof. So our Arbutus marina is definitely up there at that 25-foot mark. And then, of course, your sycamore is, 100 feet. So scale is a really important thing to remember and appreciate when you're planting trees. Make sure you know how big the roots of those trees get. These roots are from a stone pine, which is 100-foot tall by 100-foot wide tree. It has big roots, yes. When you plant a tree, think about doing what's called vertical mulching. This is essentially putting a perforated pipe in at the edge of the root ball of the tree. That perforated pipe becomes an access pipe for you to put extra water into if it's needed, to pack it with compost or worm castings if something is needed, like if the tree is struggling a little bit. It's also an oxygen pathway. So if you have really compacted soils and you have these vertical mulch access points around the tree, it will help to open up that soil and it helps get that soil sponge going. So a 5-gallon tree could just use one of these vertical tubes. But if you're doing a 24-inch box tree, you definitely want to have 3 of them. And really, you can't really have too many of them. You'll notice the placement of it is not within the root ball, but it is outside of the root ball, just outside. You want to cross stake your tree. So cross staking means at least 2 stakes. In this case, we have 3. You can see that it's being managed not with tape, not even with rubber, but with a, forgiving, like hemp-based materials for the straps. These stakes are removed after 1 year, and then you reassess. If there's a need to stake again, okay, there may be more staking, but you don't want to have the stakes on for more than a year. That staking that you've done. When you plant more trees, think about using those trees to slow and sink water. So here are a couple of examples where trees are planted. You can see one, it's creating a little courtyard to sit in, and decomposed granite courtyard, and that canopy is creating like a shaded area. And it's the same tree, by the way. And in the other, this is a relatively small yard with a relatively big, tree that's going to get relatively big. But it's performing a function. It's basically the rainwater catchment device. All right, well, hopefully you are going to get out and plant more trees. The next steps from this workshop are looking for more links, checking your particular trees and making some improvements, and telling your friends about these workshops so that we can have lots of good questions and lots of participation. I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to go ahead and launch that evaluation poll. And while you are doing that, hopefully we can take a look at questions if there were any. So, Steve, were there any questions that came up?
Yeah. Let's see, bringing them up. I have the poll up, and let me
Yes,
see.
that's perfect. So people can go ahead and do the poll. That's great.
Let's see if I get the questions up also. Let's see.
Yeah, no, that's it. They're up. Oh, the questions. Yes. Take a look. Yeah, let's see if there's a question that that or two that you maybe want to expand on a little bit.
Pamela, it looks like we have someone who's wondering about how trees could be irrigated with gray water. Could that happen safely as well?
Yeah, so trees are actually a pretty good thing to be irrigating with using your gray water for it. First, I just want to say, no matter what, you want to make sure you're not overwatering your tree. So when you're using gray water, you want to make sure that you really understand the requirement of the plant that you are watering, and you're not just putting the gray water on the tree because you have gray water. So that is something for you to be thinking about. Remember, we're trying to underwater trees, not overwater them. But gray water is a source. The thing about gray water is it's discharged in the ground, on the ground, in the ground. It's not being sprayed out. So that's good, because you can have a basin that is at the drip line of the tree or outside of the drip line of the tree, and that can be a discharge point for the gray water into a mulch basin. That's perfect for trees. That mulch will decompose, and the tree can access that water from out there. You don't want to bring your basin underneath the drip line, underneath the canopy. You want to keep it out there at the drip line. But yes, gray water is a good choice. And depending on the type of trees that you're growing, there may be trees that require more water, like there are some fruit trees that require more water. It's interesting when we start to get into the actual water requirements of trees and the health of the fruit trees, especially. A lot of the research has been about how much water do you apply for yield. So how do I get the biggest yield that I can? And in that case, more water is often better. But when you research, how do I get the healthiest fruit, the tastiest fruit, the sweetest, maybe not as big a yield, but the yield that I get is really great. In those cases, it's usually correlated with less water. So even though you can be using gray water on fruit trees, you still want to abide by this rule that we aren't overwatering the trees. We are applying the amount of water the tree needs, and maybe even underwatering a little. So keep that in mind. I don't know if anybody wants to add to that or not. Let's see.
That's interesting. That's interesting, Pamela. We did have a question about citrus trees and how often they should be watered. And, my feeling was, yeah, citrus fruit trees of all sorts seem to do fairly well with gray water, from what I understand. But I hear what you're saying. Sometimes less water is better for fruit flavor, etc. So you need to
Yeah.
check.
Yeah. So it's like just thinking about it, it's a great source. Having gray water, access to gray water is a great supplemental water source, but still don't get caught up and I just need to dump my gray water, right? We still are watering something important. I want to talk very quickly about lights, and again, be mindful that we're going to end at about 7:29, or by 7:29. Landscape lighting, this is a really important thing. And in fact, maybe we'll even do a class at some point on dark skies and on landscape lighting. Remember, trees are the host for so many insects and animals. We want to really be thinking about how we use landscape lighting, which in general actually impacts insects and animals negatively. So listen, I used to do landscape lighting, lots of uplights, very dramatic, all this stuff. Turns out it couldn't be worse. So I have eliminated uplighting on trees. Any lighting that I do now is very, very low wattage. It's from very high up in the canopy and it's always downward. It has a short period of time. It's only in that tree lighting, and actually it's beautiful because it creates moonlight, but it's only illuminating for a short period of time after dusk. It's not going on all night long. So really being a lot more conscious about how we're lighting our landscapes and keeping it in mind, for the creatures that are really thrown off by that lighting.